I've talked a lot to people like Sam Harris and to Richard Dawkins about exactly these issues, say about the antagonism between religion and science. And so one of the things that I really saw, so Dawkins regards the religious enterprise as pseudoscientific, all that body of pseudoscientific proclamation that impedes the rational progress of Enlightenment science. And so that's his perspective. And I'm not trying to parody it or to put it down in any sense. I'm just trying to relate it. And whereas Harris, and I'm using these two people because they're examples perhaps of the world's most famous atheists. Harris's argument is more, it's more emotional than that in some sense. And I don't mean irrational, I mean based in a deeper emotion. Harris identifies the spirit of totalitarianism and malevolence with the religious enterprise. And I think that's an error because he's throwing out the baby with the bathwater. And it's interesting to me in relationship to, so I would say, you're talking about the antagonism between religion and science, so one of the things I really admired about Dawkins, and his work has been quite helpful to me, by the way, is that he has this clear-headed faith in science, this in rationality that's typical of the best scientists, perhaps someone like Feynman, for example. But Dawkins, like all true scientists, believes that there is a transcendent truth and that the pursuit of that truth will set us free. And it's those claims that I think are essentially religious. And so I think it's useful to differentiate between the religious impulse towards truth, if you can call that the religious impulse, and the totalitarian aspect of the imposition of religious dogma, which I see actually as a variant not of the religious spirit, but of the totalitarian spirit. Because I do believe the greatest scientists that I've known have a religious reverence for truth. Now they say objective truth, and that's fine. It's a perfectly reasonable variant of truth. But the reverence itself doesn't seem to me to be scientific. It's predicated on whatever it is that drives reverence. And I'm afraid that what's happening at the level of the postmodern critique is that it's actually a corrosive critique of that reverence itself. It's the claim that reverence is nothing but a mask for power claims, for example. And that is a corrosive criticism. And it might be corrosive enough to bring the whole damn enterprise to a halt. And I see it shuddering forward with the corruption of journals like Nature and Science and the increasing politicization of every scientific discussion.
I'm with both you and Dawkins there, in the sense that I, like him, have got this reverence for science and truth, and somewhat skeptical of whether religion shares that, because I think faith is antithetical to it. But he is perhaps wrong that the enemy is conventional religion, because actually creeping up on us has been a much more dangerous anti-Enlightenment force, as you say, the postmodernism and a lot of other things that go with it, and totalitarianism, exactly. And I think the critique you can make of atheists like me, very validly, is that when we throw out the baby, the bathwater, the baby goes too, and we end up with something far worse.
That's the issue.
The cult of Stalin, or the cult of Foucault, or whatever it might be. So in that sense, and actually Richard concedes this, that if you're going to have, if you can't extirpate faith from the human spirit, then you might as well have a mild version of it called the Church of England.
Okay. Well, let me push you a little bit on that too, because I'm very curious about this issue of the faith-predicated presumption of the properly functioning scientist. So it seems to me. So imagine that. You tell me if you think I've got any of these presuppositions wrong, because they're crucially important to this argument. So the first is, the belief in the existence of a transcendent object. And I would say that's a faith-based belief, and here's why. So you have a scientific theory, and you can't help but look at the world of objects through that theory. So when you see the world of objects in your discipline, that vision, that perception is informed by your epistemology. But you know as a scientist that you're wrong. But the knowledge that you're wrong is predicated on an assumption, and the assumption is that there is a domain of information that exists as yet outside your presuppositions. And that has to be a faith-based axiom, because given that that source of information exists beyond your current set of axioms, you can't encounter it. You have to just accept it as a continuing reality. And it would be the reality of that knowledge that currently lies beyond us.
Well, I certainly think that the purpose of science is to find new mysteries. It's not just to solve them, because in solving one, you always come upon more. You know, in finding out that we're just a blue marble spinning through space, we then find there are things like suns and galaxies and black holes and things, each of which is a new mystery that we have to address. And I love that aspect about science, that, you know, the more trees we chop down in the clearing of knowledge, the more forest comes into view, as it were, the more stuff we don't know and don't understand. And I think it's worth reminding ourselves that, you know, what gets scientists up in the morning in a lab is not the things they know already. You put them on the shelf and feed them to the students. It's the things you don't yet know. It's the part of the puzzle you haven't yet found out. And we mustn't lose that.
Well, and you did refer to that, and I think this is extremely interesting. You referred to that as a love, and that's not an objective observation in some sense, right? It's a reference to a particular kind of
Correct.
motivation.
Yeah.
And so, but then let's say we can inquire into that a little bit more deeply. We might say, well, what's that love predicated on? And one possible source is that, well, you see that it engages you in a meaningful enterprise, right? So there's a sense of implicit meaning in this search to make contact with that which still lies beyond you. And so that's engaging, and it's deeply engaging. It's part of the instinct of meaning as far as I'm concerned. But it's also predicated on the idea, and I can't help but think that this is fundamentally a religious axiom. And I think it's a Judeo-Christian derived religious axiom, which is that you also believe that the truth will set you free. And in some sense, Matt, our whole bloody discussion today centers on that, right? I mean, you're delving into the COVID-19 mystery because you are making a presumption here against those who would take the pathway of convenience and deceit, let's say, that no, you don't get to do that. I don't care what your rationales are. Something actually happened in Wuhan, and the reason we need to find out what it is because finding out what is true is actually the best pathway forward, regardless of your bloody political preconceptions. And I can't see, and this is a genuine question to you, I don't see that as anything different than a reference to the idea, for example, that the divine word that the word of truth itself is divine, and that the manifestation of that truth is in fact freeing. And I don't think that's a within science claim.
I'm completely happy with that. I can give you some very dull, practical reasons why we need to find out how the pandemic started, so that we can predict where the next one's coming from, so that we can deter bioterrorists and bad actors who might be thinking of copying what happened, etc., etc. But those aren't my real motivation. My real motivation is because I think truth matters more than anything else. There's a wonderful quote somebody gave me the other day, which he said was from Solzhenitsyn, but I don't think it is. I'd like to know who said it. Truth matters more than consequence. You know, the people who don't want us to know what happened are worried about the consequence of finding out what happened. But I'm sorry, the truth comes first. We have to deal with the consequences of finding out the truth. But the truth is what I really care about. And I do think, in a sense, it'll set me free, and you free, and all of us free. It may be uncomfortable, just as finding out that we're not at the center of the universe, we're not a unique creature, we have the same genes as others, we're 40% genetically the same as a banana. These are all humiliating things science has found. But they're not. But for me, they're liberating as well.
Well, and you made a very strong argument there on the consequence front. So, because look, here's the totalitarian presumption. Essentially, is that we have a political theory. So let's say it's Marxism in this case, and we bloody well know it's right. And so, because we already have the truth at hand, then all of our endeavors should be devoted towards the promotion of that truth. And it's a final truth, and we have it at hand. There's no transcendent truth there, apart from the doctrine itself. Now, your proposition, and I think this is the proposition of true scientists, is no, you have to abandon your political presumptions completely. And that means that you have to face even those truths that make you tremendously uncomfortable cognitively and emotionally in the moment. You cannot use that discomfort as evidence. You have to assume, regardless of such evidence, strangely enough, that in the final analysis, all things considered, there's nothing that's more liberating than the truth. And Matt, I think that that's the core doctrine. I do believe that's the core doctrine upon which Judeo-Christian society itself is founded, because the doctrine of the divine word is something like this, as far as I've been able to tell. It's something like the proper action of the consciousness that liberates us is the forthright confrontation with possibility itself, with potential itself, and the willingness to confront that head on in truth. And the consequence of that confrontation is the construction of the habitable world that is good. That seems to me to be the doctrine of the word at the beginning of Genesis. And there's a notion there that human beings, men and women alike, are made in that image. And I suppose you could argue about my theological interpretation, but that does seem to be the doctrine.
Yeah, I'm no theologian, but I think what you're describing, and this is perhaps where I do differ from you, is Judeo-Christian philosophy as tamed or refracted by the Enlightenment, by Spinoza and Descartes,
and by
David
the Greeks,
Hume and Adam
by
Smith
the Greeks
and
before
Voltaire.
that.
No, but I think the problem, I think if you go back and look at the early history of the church, it was a brutally nihilistic cult that stamped out a lot of openness that came from the Greeks. And so I don't think, I don't think that it was as harmless for its first 1,500 years as bishops and priests like to tell us. Now, in that sense, I think it was like the modern Communist Party, which in China says the party matters most. Xi Jinping is right about everything. You must see everything through the lens of how you can help to further our aims, which is a deeply unimaginative way of seeing the world. I think a lot of modern Islam is like that, and I think quite a lot of the most fanatical parts of Christianity are like that. And I think Christianity was like that for most of its first 1,500 years, or at least in bursts it was. And then it came to terms with the wonderful ideas of the Enlightenment. And I just want to introduce another word here that I think is very important, and that word is wonder. I do love the wonder that I get from deep understanding of, deep geological time, or the scale of the universe, or where a virus came from, or whatever. It's wonderful in the literal meaning of the word. And I don't feel that Christianity or religion generally has a monopoly on that wonder. I think Richard Dawkins has made a very good point here, that unweaving the rainbow, finding out what a rainbow's made of, has not made it less wonderful, it's made it more so. And Keats was wrong about that.
Well, that I agree with that, by the way. I also think, and this is why we have to be very careful about our use of terminology, is that I would say that the negative religious phenomena that you're describing are a manifestation not of the religious spirit, but of the totalitarian spirit, and that those are often conflated. Okay, and then I would say that, and to put this into a deeper context, that sense of wonder that you described, I don't think that there is any difference between that and proper worship. Because I think attending to the wonder of being is the fundamental religious act in some real sense. And there are preconditions for that, and one of them is an epistemic humility, right? You have to allow yourself to apprehend that which is beyond. And that is an instinct, and I think it's part of the instinct that drives love itself. And so I'd be very interested, for example, in the psychophysiology of awe, and that's associated with wonder. And so one of the things that's extraordinarily interesting about awe is that it involves piloerection. And so, you know, when you see a cat puff itself up in a burst of fur, when it sees a giant predator, it's piloerection that's driving that. And when you get those chills up and down your back and maybe your hair stands on end, it's that same apprehension of you could think about a predator as an unsolved mystery to an animal. We use that same framework of wonder and awe to apprehend the unknown itself. And we've learned to contend with the unknown as a potential predator, obviously, but also as a potential source of redemption. And that, I would say, being guided by that sense of wonder, which is humility predicated and driven by a desire to pursue the truth, that is the manifestation of the most fundamental religious instinct. And I think that needs to be differentiated from religion as a dogmatic structure, which can degenerate towards totalitarianism like any other human endeavor, and does, right? And we have to be on the watch for that. But we don't want to throw the baby out with the bathwater.